Thanks, James. Just to give you a bit of background about myself. So I started with the referees pre-season at the end of 2013. So I started out as an interim sports scientist doing my industry-based PhD, but because we're relatively understaffed, I quickly found myself at the coalface day to day with the referees. Some of you may or may not know that we actually have full-time referees for rugby league, so I'll actually delve into that a little bit later. With my PhD, firstly, we looked at the movement mechanics of the referees on field. What do they do to get some data around that? We also had a look at some factors like referee experience and referee fitness to see if we can actually start to predict what a referee would do, depending on which teams they're playing as well. Second study, we looked at some subjective feedback from the referees. So what parameters affect how they perceive their own performance after a game. And then thirdly, as James said, we started to delve into a little bit of video analysis. Okay, so we know physically and mentally what the referees are doing and how they perceive their performance. How can we control that and then track and train that into the future? So I know I'm last slot on the first day, so beer o'clock. I'll try and keep it nice and quick for you so we can get the staff at the Bavarian doing something. So we've worked with Smartabase for the last 4 years. So we use that as an AMS tool for the referees. Our builder was Dan, so Dan has helped me build the system from the ground up. Subsequently, I was speaking to Dan and Jose outside, and I did take Dan to watch a game with me once to explain to him what the referees are doing through the game. And subsequently, Dan has now moved on from the referees. So Braden, I'm going to wait at least 12 months before I take you to a game and explain what the referees are doing out there on the field. As I said, I'm at UTS, so a lot of the programs I've done are involved with UTS. So if you see me shaking up here, it's not because I'm nervous, it's because I know my PhD supervisors are in the building as we speak. I like to start this one with most of my presentation. So if you obviously live in Sydney and you read any of the Sydney papers, particularly the Telegraph, you'll know this has been a pretty busy week for us. There's a bit of an error on the weekend and consequently we've been dragged through the coals all week. But we're not actually naive to think that it's just NRL referees. We seem to think there is a lot of pressure around us, disproportionate to other sports, but we do understand that referees are a hot topic in many sports, particularly if there's not much news going on, we'll pick the low-hanging fruit. And with the advent of social media, obviously any keyboard warrior now can jump on and have their say. So when I get to some of the video analysis, I'm going to ask as a group to make some decisions about rugby league. So we'll see how quick you are then to jump on and make a few decisions for me. And I always like to have this one. So this is a former coach, but it is a good little intro to any presentation we do.
There's got to be an investigation into this. Someone's got to be accountable for this.
So while I myself am not in the papers, I do feel like some part responsible for the performance of the referees out there. So we do ride the highs and lows with them as a performance department. So just to give you a background here, this is basically a snapshot of our entire staff, all the way from Lockie, who's now our interim honours student, all the way up to the top. So we've got Todd Greenberg, who is the CEO of the NRL. So performance staff, 19 full-time guys. Bernie Sutton, who is the head of the referees. He reports to Tony Archer, who's overall head of match officials for the whole league. Brian Canavan, who's the head of football. And then again, like I said, Todd and the governor as well. We did a bit of a cameo session at the governor's house. He was reluctant, but he did put on the referee's shirt because by his own admission, he's a strong supporter of the referees as long as South Sydney win on the weekend. We've come quite a fair way with regards to the physical performance of referees, and we take a lot of pride in actually developing that. So throughout our program, like I said, the referees are full-time, so they're based at ANZ Stadium at our gym facility, Olympic Park, and we've actually tried to change the physical profile of the athlete. So they will do a lot of Olympic lifts, not only for injury prevention, but that real power profile. The intermittent nature of what they're doing means that it's short and sharp. There are long periods of rest, but when they need to go, they need to move pretty quickly. So you can see the profile of the athlete has changed over the last sort of 10 years or so. In saying that as well, like many clubs, we do like to do a lot of pre-season activities, and I make it a mantra every week that once, obviously not to this extent, but we get out of the offices and we play a different sport, just to get our heads out of rugby league and give a little perspective to the guys. So this was, again, we follow a similar pre-season to a club. So this is a November pre-season, and obviously we had the guys doing some team building stuff out there. Just some basic fitness data on the referee. So this is from about 2 or 3 years ago, just to highlight the actual aerobic capacity of the referees. So this was during a yo-yo test performance, and you can compare to the blue, which is Serie A referees, and then English Super League players, and then Queensland Cup players. So this is actually a little bit higher now, again focusing on that physical capacity of the referees, with the scope of getting them into best position without that accumulated fatigue throughout the game to make superior decisions. Just to give you some data, so State of Origin 1 down in Melbourne, these are some of the metrics that we're able to get out of the game. So you can see the 2 touch judges either side average about 8 kilometres a game, which is typical of what we see in the NRL competition as well. Jerry Sutton, who was the head referee, averaged about 9 Ks. So that's typical of an NRL, but what was atypical was there was a period of play, which is really sort of attributed to the quality of the game that State of Origin is, where Jerry was running at about 120 to 130 metres per minute, which is sort of 50% more than he would for an NRL game, for a period of 11.5 minutes, which is typically unheard of in an NRL game for that much consistent ball in play. So that's sort of our high-end worst-case scenario. So that affects our training drills as well. A little bit ironically is we were trialling the new Clear Sky data, which uses radio frequency, and it interfered with our referee camera, so I got no data for actually calling the pocket ref. So I'll elaborate on that a little bit later. Again, just to give you some background about some of the challenges we face as a performance team, is that we don't have one game around, we have 8. So effectively, we're training 8 separate teams to officiate over 4 and sometimes 5 different nights of the week. So we very much, to have best practice, implement a rolling roster. However, as an industry mandate, they have to have Tuesday off. So that sort of mucks around with the rolling roster scheme. Instead of 25 matches in an NRL comp, we've got 201. And any one round, there's going to be a mix of travel, home and away games, so I can't be present at all of them. And something that you don't know is we don't know where a referee is going until the Monday night of that week beforehand. So we're very much reactive, and when we get the appointments, we quickly put it into the template to work out training loads and training days and what referees need to do to be prepared for their matches. So like I said, for the last 4 years, we've been partnered with Smartabase, and we use them for a number of things. But as performance manager, I see it as my mandate to really focus on the health and wellness of the officials that I oversee. Like I mentioned at the start, if you're aware of any of the media, the controversy that's going around this week, we are in the spotlight. So daily wellness is something that we look at consistently. Obviously, the officials involved on the weekend have flagged quite poorly throughout the whole week. But interestingly, and I know it's only a case study, the touch judge in question, who is one of our most durable trainers, has today flagged for muscle soreness, which is very atypical of him. So it's a good sort of example of that interaction between mental stress, fatigue, sleep quality, and now physical soreness. Also, we have the referees do a post-match feedback. So this is on a 20-point scale, just about how they feel they went physically, mentally, time pressure, and then situational stress. So that's confrontation from players. They track that across all the games as well, and that really gives us an idea of how the referees went throughout the game. Like I said, I can't be at all their games. I try to watch as much as we can, but every week we have a staff snapshot first thing Monday morning so that I can pick up off the coaches, guys who might be flagging in this department, so that we know how to treat them throughout the training session for that week. All right, just to give you some background about the refereeing model. So implemented in 2009, the NRL uses 2 on-field referees, so a head referee and an assist referee. If you hear me say pocket referee, the pocket and the assist referee are an interchangeable term. Initially, in the first 2 years of its implementation, it began as a 50-50 split. So what that means is that both referees were able to control and make decisions at any one time, and that they would officiate 50% in that sort of role. That was quickly changed because there was the perception of inconsistency and differences of opinion. So the model now stands that it is a minimum of an 80-20 split. So a minimum 80%, the one referee will control the game. That is dependent on the head referee handing the power over, which he will verbally do in the game, and then the other referee will make the decisions. In tight games or high-profile games, it's not uncommon for the head referee to referee the whole match. We call that 100-0 games. So if it's a 100-0 game, the assist referee actually will not use his whistle at all. Again, this was implemented to increase, number one, what we found was there was a lot of different tactics from teams with wrestle in behind the ruck. So that assist referee or in the pocket will adjudicate a lot on that, and also allow the head referee to control the players around him on that 10-metre line. Again, extra set of eyes, eases physical and mental pressures. Now that's a little bit of a caveat, because what we found from the GPS data is that they actually run more in a game, both referees, and they are able to do higher intensity sprints with the two referees. But those sprints are of a shorter distance, because if there's a sudden change in play, like an intercept, there's a guy that's already 30 metres ahead, so he will assume control for that play and already be there much closer than the one referee model. Also, with the mental aspect of it, if a referee has had a clanger and he feels that build up too much, he can actually throw control over the other referee to have a mental deload mid-game. But that's something that we really need to research a lot more. It happens anecdotally, but we haven't really dug into that with actual figures. Again, negatives in the media quite a bit, but even more so this week. The variance of interpretation of the rules, apparent reduced accountability of the referees on field, but the big one for me is the lack of public understanding of what the specific roles are in charge of when they're out there officiating. So this is just some brief descriptive data from my first study. So I wanted to really highlight the specificity of each role. So just from pure match demands, you can see that there is a significant difference between what they are required to do, to the point now within our full-time squad, we actually have guys that will be professional assist referees. They won't actually be appointed to a head referee at all. We have some guys that are dual that will mix in and out, and some that are more experienced head referees that they'll stay at that. So no doubt some of you have probably done the maths. So we've got 8 games, there's 4 on-field officials. I only have 19 full-time referees. So inherently some of them have to double up, or I use a pool of part-time officials that I have that are mostly my touch judges, or that they're aligned with Brad at New South Wales Rugby League, who officiate his competitions, to come up into my tier. So it's a little bit hard. It's a challenge for us to monitor their training loads, but it's like Michael Maguire, who's been with us this year. He's from the South Sydney Rabbitohs. An analogy I use to him is, how many times did the Rabbitohs run out where the forwards didn't speak to the backs all week? And that's the sort of scenario that I face as a performance manager. You've got 50% of your resources that will be there at game day that haven't been involved in that week's training. So as much as we can, we film our team meetings, and that we mandate that they must watch them. And then the head referee, we put the onus on him to loop in his game plan and his strategy prior to getting to the stadium. So just a bit of a visual representation, the controlling referee there holding the 10, the assistant or the pocket referee there, and then his 2 officials. We also, at every ground, will have a match day coach. So this is a coach that's present prior to the start of the game, who will go to the sheds at half time and then post-game be in the sheds with them. And he also acts as a fail-safe for the bunker. So the bunker is our 3rd video referee. So all decisions that the head referee can send up will go to the bunker. Important for me, because with the advent of the bunker, I was able to use some of the video technology that I previously didn't have access to. So the head referee can receive information not only from his other officials on field, but the match day coach as well. So that's something that's, again, contentious in the media, that they're being overcoached or being told what to do as they're on the fly. I would refute that wholeheartedly, and there's been some interviews yesterday from one of our referees, if you want to look those up, Grant Atkins, but it's more there to give them an overall aspect of the game, how it's flowing, how it's looking. And like I said before, like I will elaborate on, we're really rare in how we, in rugby league, that we charge our match officials with so much onus on controlling both space and time of what the players can do. So to show you what I mean by that is, obviously one referee is in charge of setting the 10-metre distance between the two teams for each tackle. There are not many sports in the world where the referee actually dictates how far away you can stand from each other. So if we bias one side or the other by even half a metre, that creates more reaction time for the ball players to effectively change the game. Not only that, but we are in charge of the timing of tackles. So there is no set standard for how long it takes for a tackle to be in effect. And in fact, the game actually wants us to reward an attacking player. If he breaks through the line, he then earns the right to have a faster play of the ball. Whereas a defensive side, if they hit and drive the player back, they earn the right to stay in the tackle longer. So the referee has to control that and adjudicate on that up to 350, 400 times a game. That's before anyone's even scored a point yet. Just listen to the vocab if it comes through.
Chased him infield.
So you can't hear the noise, but you can see the pocket referee is actually talking to the defenders to get out. And on that audio, you could also hear the head referee holding back the defensive side. So they have to wait until the ball player touches the ball with his foot. So these are all the extra things that the referees do on the field that I told Dan about before he ran, that they're in charge of, that a lot of people don't understand or don't see. This is just an example of the match evaluations. So we have here a few of the statistics that the guys can use. So play the ball speeds and offside accuracy, which are objective data that the stats provide us. And then everything from there down were subjective feedback given to the referees by the coaches. So this is just an overall snapshot of the 8 rounds per game, and then we just use a simple traffic light system to highlight some different areas. And again, the objective versus subjective feedback. We can then track these across the round. After my study, we found that the validity of this system wasn't that great, so we've moved away from this. But you can see from then, what we were able to do is look at their decision points, which were minused off them for the severity of a decision, -1, 2 or 10. So 10 being the worst decision they can make, which is an incorrect decision, which leads to points for the opposite side. And then green being their effort areas, so subjective points for communication, teamwork or positioning. So this all led, particularly once we scrapped this system, it all led to the realisation that how do we train the referees in the exact skills that they need when they're out there on the field? Historically, there's 2 ways that we've done it. One is it's open to all clubs, but we send them to team scrimmages. So today I had 4 referees go to 2 separate clubs, and it's only because the clubs have asked us to send referees to them. What that does, it gives them exposure to the talent that they're going to referee on the weekend. But what it doesn't do is let me control the volume or training load of sessions. And it can be detrimental. So the referees often go to these club scrimmages and the head coach will say, I don't want you to blow any penalties for the next 10 minutes. Because if he blows penalties, and you can imagine if they were at a club, if any of your training, if you brought referees along and they kept stopping the game continually, it quickly frustrates the coach. So it actually can be detrimental to what we're trying to teach referees, because instead of using that impulse to make a decision on the field, they're naturally overriding that natural instinct. And the other way that we've done it is the referees play each other themselves. So without throwing too many in the deep end, there's a reason these guys are referees and they're not players themselves. So I've got some video to highlight that fact. But number one, the skill level's nowhere near the skill that they're going to officiate on the weekend. But also, these guys are doing contact work that they've never learned how to tackle or wrestle each other. So the first one. So we film all the sessions for review, but again, the level of skill isn't as great or up to standard. So a way to combat that is we actually have ex-players now part of our team. So a lot of the ball players you see that was all right are they ex-players. One of the guys in the next clip, he's running loads and excels were a little bit high, so I said he had to go into the dummy half position. So traditionally in set starts there's very little excels or decels. He convinced me that he had to go on the wing because he's the best catcher. So this is what happened. You might hear me at the end, his nickname's Hopper. He very quickly went back to dummy half after that. So there was a real clear need for a valid skill-making assessment tool that we could control, one, and two, that we could put the same referee into different, multiple referees into for the same scenario. Because no 2 games are ever going to be the same. So to compare referees across my subject size was quite difficult or virtually impossible. So what we found out was that the broadcasters would put a referee camera on the referee. So that was before we even asked them to do it. However, during broadcast, you rarely see it. So it takes a little bit of familiarisation to get used to it. Some people get a little bit seasick. But as the technology's developed, there's been greater ballast stabilisers to sort of smooth out that image. And it's what we hypothesise from this is, one, we could create a skill decision-making task that could differentiate between referees of different abilities, and also then just use it in talent identification and ongoing training for our referees. So here's, with the advent of the bunker, as I mentioned before, we're able to get multiple images through, all time synced to the same one. What that then gave me was the ability to just focus solely on the ref cam and collate a database of clips for training and talent identification. So important for my study, because I wanted the findings of that study to be actually applicable to what the referee is seeing on the ground. So his field of vision when he's out there. And that's just an example of one of the referee cams that they wear. So this is just a comparison. So Broncos, Panthers, this is what everyone at home sees. And this is what the referee saw. So vastly different. If you pair them up, you can see. So quite shockingly, from an evaluation perspective, we were still and still are evaluating referees on the right side of the screen. Whereas for a coaching and a learning tool, we should be really pushing this more and more. And this is what I do as much as I can to implement this. So for the research that I did, 180 clips were cut for a database in the hope of making a valid decision-making assessment. Again, we hypothesised that it would be able to differentiate between refereeing ability and then potentially, if it didn't, look at other areas of refereeing expertise that we could highlight. Additional to this, so not just getting a decision clip and then seeing if the referee is correct, what we wanted to do was looking at vision tracking. Okay, what are the referees looking at when they're getting correct or incorrect decisions? So I thought I'd give you a little turn, so we'll go hands up. I was going to get Brad up, but he's helped me a lot throughout the year, so I won't put him on the spot. But I just want you, I'll give you two options at the end, and we'll just do a simple hands up. So this is when the donut's gone, you've got to make your decision. Hands up, lost ball or penalty? Lost ball. Did anyone factor in the marker? Have a look at the marker. If he's square. Lost ball's correct, but I'm sure you factored in if that marker has influenced that ball player, it's a penalty for the marker not square, yeah? Good. Number two. Play on, knock on? Play on. What tackle count is it? Same or reset? Final one. Penalty or loss? Penalty. So that just goes to show you that it's quite difficult what they do. So that's why you're running 9Ks as well and controlling those other aspects that I mentioned before. Through UTS, what we're able to do is use the SMI glasses that you actually put on your head, and they can focus on, they can actually track what you're focusing on. So forgive any optical or cognitive scientists in here, I'm about to butcherize this, but if you just extend your arm to full length and focus on your thumbnail, that thumbnail is about the only focal point that you can in your whole field of view. So it's about 3 to 5% of your whole field of view, what you focus on at one particular time. There's a bit of a clip here that well, it doesn't explain it, but it shows you how we can look at the focal point live.
I'm looking at this picture there and I'm reading the messages from the flyer. Now I'm looking at different people here, checking if they are interested in SMI, different faces. Hello, sir. My name is Andros. I'm from Sensomotoric Instruments, and what you see here is our latest generation of eye tracking devices. So these glasses track where I'm looking at. So I'm looking at different people here, and you can see it instantly. So what it is good for? It's good for marketing research, for example. So which objects I'm looking at before I make my choice. If I drive, do I pay attention to all the pedestrians or anything else? Or even in the developmental psychology, how do our kids develop? When do they start to interact with mommy and daddy or not? That's what we do. So what we have is we got 2 eye cameras here filming the eyes and how they move, and we got a scene camera in here which films my field of view. And what we do with our software is we put a dot at the point where I'm looking at the moment. You see this then in the scene image, and you can follow either live by wireless or later offline the objects I was looking at, I was focusing at.
Okay, for our testing procedure, we had 19 of the full-time officials, so that is the whole population of the full-time guys, 6 of the sub-elite, so that's that second tier down, the New South Wales and Queensland comps, and then 10 novices. Our next door neighbours where we are in the offices are actually NRL memberships department, so I got 10 of those guys to come in. So the proviso for those guys was they had to have a self-reported good knowledge of the rules. So one question I use is how many tackles are in a set. So if they said anything other than 6, they were excluded. We had to do a 15-minute familiarisation session. As you can see, if you're not used to the jerky movement, it can make you feel a little uneasy, to the point where watching 15 minutes straight, particularly on long runs where there's a lot of movement, can make you feel sort of seasick. Of the 180 clips, just for controllability, we're only able to use 23. So that was controlling it for just the pocket ref in a certain situation. And then we had that same donut, so 20 seconds rest in between each clip. For the point scoring of the decision, they got 1 point for a correct decision, 1 point for describing the decision. So you could easily just say penalty, not a penalty. You had to describe what the penalty was for, similar to what you'll see the referees do on field. And then you had to say what the subsequent action is post the penalty or post your decision. So similarly to how I asked you, okay, what's the tackle count now? Do you reset it, or is it tackle 1, is it tackle 0? Here's an example of one of our referees. And another. This is what the overlay looks like with the focal point on there as well. So from that post-data analysis, what we can then do is define areas of interest on the software, highlight that, and then go through clip by clip. So the areas of interest that we used were the ball, the ruck, markers, first and second contact, the alternate referee, and also off-the-ball players. We put those into the system, and then it will also highlight any white space, so any area other than those ones defined. So again, just highlighting areas of interest. Again, this is what we see on TV. But you can imagine the view of the pocket ref there. Lost ball. So from his field of view, you can clearly see that an area of interest there would be the hands on the ball there. Okay, so instead of calling a lost ball, he may have called a strip. So again, going through laying over area by area, what we found, so before we get to the gaze overlay, just from the pure decision-making stuff, we found a significant difference between what the referees would do, your A columns, and then the decisions of the novices. Again, this is only very brief descriptive statistics that I've used here. What we're doing at the moment is diving through and looking at the modelling to see, okay, when a referee makes an incorrect decision, is it a change in his gaze behaviour that's done that? What we found that we couldn't do is actually differentiate between expertise of referees. So your top tier guys and your second tier guys were pretty much similar. So that sort of led to believe, again, top tier referees aren't about pure decision making, but there are a lot of other aspects that culminate into a successful referee performance. So isolated clips without context can't actually differentiate between expertise level in referees. What we thought then was, well, if it's differentiating between the novices, clearly they must be looking at something else. They must be not seeing the cues that are making the referees pick up these decisions. And that is completely incorrect. So surprisingly, for nearly every single variable, they're looking at the same things. So this is duration. So each number indicates a different area of interest. And as you can see, there's virtually no discrimination between that when we look at duration of fixation on each of these areas of interest, nor when we look at which area was focused on first, or in what sequence they were fixated on. So there's plenty of other variables, but for those three, there was no difference between the novice population and the referees. So they're actually seeing the same things to form different decisions. What did that mean? Again, as I alluded to, referees perform better in the decision-making assessment, but what we found was the discriminating factor was that procedural knowledge. Again, anyone can call it a penalty or not a penalty, and it's linked to the binary nature of decisions in rugby league. He's knocked it on or he's knocked it back. Anyone can call that from the armchair because you're actually looking at the same cues the referees are. It's that second step of identifying and then the procedural knowledge following that to know, okay, what is the next step following that? It'd be all good if a referee could make the decision and then walk off the field, but he's got to manage the game and keep it flowing. No differences in gaze behaviour, and again, procedural knowledge is a discriminating factor. So in a nutshell and colloquially, novices seeing what the referees are seeing, but they don't have that procedural knowledge to be effective decision makers, which is part of the reason why we're so heavily scrutinised as rugby league officials. The general pundits are actually seeing the same things out there and making the decisions. So when we get them wrong, we're made aware of that. Obviously, I have to note some limitations to the study. So what we decided afterwards was that the clips need to be longer to create some of that context. If there's no distinction between the gaze tracking, perhaps we need to extend that a little bit more. Again, it sort of alludes to that the referees aren't expert decision makers, that they're actually expert game managers, controlling the two teams in the flow of the game, not just making isolated decisions. And again, what we could have done is use different roles. So I limited it to that one sort of vision. We can change it for different roles, and also using the head. So when you're looking at that clip filmed from first-person camera, you're limited to what the head movement of the referee on the day. And another one is the position of all the areas of interest. But I was the sole researcher who did all that, so we tried to mitigate that as much as we can. So this is an example of a bit of a longer clip. Note the boot that nearly gets him in the head. So including multiple tackles where the referee would have to voice commands like he would on the field. And just to summarise and finish up, guys, some future directions where we want to take this sort of stuff. Obviously, different effects of different parameters that we can add to it. So induce mental or physical fatigue and how that affects one, decision making, and then two, gaze behaviour. The effects of contextual information. So Lockie, who I showed you before, his honours research is based around adding in contextual factors to the referee prior to their decisions. So hard to replicate that, but you say to the referee, okay, it's 12 all and it's the 75th minute, and we want to see if that's going to change their decision making. What do these factors have to do with what they're going to do up there?
Opening tonight from them after what they showed last week. Ambushed by the Cowboys.
Obviously, we can use it in its raw form for development, training and ID, particularly now because more and more of the lower tier, so Brad's level ISP games and Queensland Cup games are going towards the two referee model. So a lot of junior referees haven't experienced a game from this field of vision. They're used to being holding the 10. They haven't actually seen in behind the ruck and some of the wrestle techniques that teams use. And also for B-Tough training. So these are the sessions that we do midweek. We call brain training under fatigue, where we simulate heart rates similar to what the referees see in games, and then we'll put some of this footage in front of them for them to make decisions on the fly. And then obviously where we just want to go in the future is 3D capture. So with the advancements in technology, we don't have to have multiple cameras on the head, but it's much more pliable, so that I may eventually have a referee run around a trial match with a 3D camera on his head. What that can then do is be implemented into a VR headset, and now the SMI, the same technology we've used, have inbuilt gaze tracking into a VR. So you're not limited to where the referee looked on the day, but you can actually take in the whole environment if you wish. That's me.